All right.
Iron Maiden. Are you ready, my friends?
Let's do it.
First
I'm
time
ready.
we're covering Iron Maiden, and really one of the first metal albums we're going to cover. But before we get into that, let's talk about in the montage how you heard Run to the Hills and how right now you're going to hear The Prisoner. All right, Iron Maiden, Number of the Beast, the third album from the band. We're going
And
to
the
be
number of the rankings, John.
Yes. So what is the number of the Beast here?
The number
Matt?
of the ranking of the Beast comes at number 35 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 2 in 1982, number 278 of all time, and it is Iron Maiden's highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. Also, like the other two records we've covered tonight, not making Rolling Stone's list. So 0 for 3 in Rolling Stone tonight, guys.
And as you know, we cover the highest rated album from a band that we cover multiple times, so we will be covering Power Slave, the album that follows this, in a future Cold Listen Hot Take. So, Iron Maiden, named after the medieval torture device as immortalized in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, when they are told to be placed in Iron Maiden, to which they respond excellent, and then of course execute them, which is bogus, which is one of my favorite Bill and Ted things. Iron Maiden was formed on Christmas Day in Leighton, East London in 1975. I would love to go over all of the various lineups of Iron Maiden from 1975 to 1978, but I'm not going to because there's thousands of them and people left the band for every reason you can possibly imagine, with the exception of one gentleman, and that is bassist and primary songwriter Steve Harris, who is the constant of the band throughout the entire run of the band. So let's just say from 75 to 78, there's Steve Harris and a bunch of dudes, none of whom will end up in the band for their first album, self-titled Iron Maiden. Okay, that lineup in 1978 finally congeals a little bit. So you've got Harris, there's drummer Doug Sampson, there's guitarist Dave Murray, and there's vocalist Paul Di'Anno. Now you may notice I said one guitarist, right? Not two guitarists, because in 78 they were still only one guitar, one bass at this point. So that is the lineup that records the 4-song demo that begins Iron Maiden's viability as a commercial band. So they create this 4-song demo, and then they begin to gig off of that demo throughout London. As you may imagine, people say, this band kind of kicks ass. And they become popular enough to self-release an EP called the Soundhouse Tapes in 1979, which sold out all 5,000 copies of its printing. Which is pretty amazing when you think about it. That obviously garners enough good press that they sign with EMI, we just mentioned, in December of 1979. So Iron Maiden is on EMI as the 80s begin, basically, the very tail end of the 70s. Sampson, the drummer, departs shortly before their debut and is replaced by former Sampson drummer Clive Burr. The band Sampson is going to be very important to the Iron Maiden story, as we'll talk about later. But so at this point, it is Murray on guitar, Di'Anno as vocalist, and Harris on bass, and now Sampson is the drummer. They also add second guitarist Dennis Stratton. He is their second choice, which will become important later when the first choice turns them down. So they are now the 5-member version of Iron Maiden that will become the classic number of people in the band. The debut album is recorded very quickly and becomes a hit in the UK, not making really any effect in the US certainly, and not even really worldwide necessarily, which does not last long. It's largely in the UK based off of the single Running Free. If you listen to the first album, it definitely has elements of punk rock way more so than this album does. A lot of that is because Paul Di'Anno, as a vocalist, is a much lower cadence and a much more sort of punk rock delivery. There's actually 2 songs on this album that we'll talk about that were really written for Di'Anno's register. I'll be curious when we get there if you can identify what they are, because they do sound very, very different than the rest of the album. So anyway, Iron Maiden starts on the Mother of All Years in 1980. They released their debut album. They opened for Kiss on the Unmasked tour.
Nice.
That's the album where Kiss finally takes off the face paint, right? That was there. They supported Judas Priest on select dates. So this is right after British Steel came out, right? So Priest is at peak power. And they appeared at the Reading Music Festival in 1980 in front of a gigantic crowd. Also, 2 of their music videos from their first album, the song Iron Maiden and the song Wrathchild, both awesome songs if you check them out, were staples on early MTV and were played as amongst the first videos ever on MTV, and they are considered to be the first heavy metal videos ever shown on MTV. So they're getting lots of, they're starting to creep in to the consciousness. They follow up the self-titled in 81 with an album called Killers. It is still the group that recorded the first one. So we're talking Di'Anno on vocals, Murray and Stratton on guitars, Sampson on drums, and then Harris on bass. They tour extensively on the Killers album. One thing to mention about Killers as well is that this is the first album that involves a gentleman by the name of Martin Birch, who is their producer on every other album that they make until 1992 when he retires. So the full classic Maiden run of albums in the 80s and early 90s, really the 80s, and then they kind of refound their niche again, later in the 90s. But Martin Birch is the guy there, and he's credited with giving them a heavier approach to their sound, which, if you listen to Killers, is there. 82 brings a heck of a lot of stuff. They are on the Killers tour, and at this time, Paul Di'Anno is heavily into drugs. I think there's a quote where he says he basically was doing cocaine night and day all the time and realized that he just couldn't do it anymore. So at the end of that tour, he is sort of released from the band. It's not a mutual decision, but I think Di'Anno realized he just couldn't, do this anymore, touring and stuff. It was involuntary in the sense that I don't think he asked for his release, but I think everybody knew. Harris was also chafing a little bit at, he wanted a little bit more vocal range and sort of epicness in their tracks, and Di'Anno, like I said, was more of a straight-ahead singer, more punk rock singer. So Di'Anno is now gone, okay? Stratton leaves the band due to creative differences, the second guitarist, and he is replaced by the childhood friend of members of the band, and that's Adrian Smith, who becomes the second guitarist. Adrian Smith was actually asked to be the guitarist when Stratton joined, but declined due to his commitment to his original band. They hold auditions, and another Sampson member, Bruce Dickinson, becomes the lead vocalist on this album. So Adrian Smith as second guitarist and Bruce Dickinson both make their debuts on this album. Obviously, 2 game changers sonically in their sound. Both of them have very identifiable both vocal and guitar range, and this is where they kind of become the triple guitar attack as well. It becomes a piece of the band's deal. I should mention that Eddie, the band's mascot, the skull that you see on all the Iron Maiden albums, originated on the first Iron Maiden album. So he's there throughout all of their albums, and he's a prominent part of their stage show, both in iconography on the stage and live action versions of him as well. The Number of the Beast is their real breakthrough album. In the UK, it's a top 10 album. It is a top 10 album in Japan and other places in Europe as well. Success came a little bit later in the US and South America, where Iron Maiden is currently extremely huge. But this was the first time that an Iron Maiden album made the Billboard Top 40 albums. So this is when it comes in. It probably was more known because when Iron Maiden toured the US, they were significantly protested by both conservative politicians and religious activists who thought they were satanic bands. Obviously, the number of the beast, 666, there was stuff like that. Of course, the band said it was ridiculous and was completely baffled by that, reaction / conservative thing because, it wasn't literal, but, you know how it is. So yes, they got a lot of press during this U.S. tour because they rubbed a lot of those folks the wrong way. Notably on this album, Harris usually wrote most of the songs, but actually Clive Burr on his last album here with the band got a songwriting credit, and Adrian Smith was credited with writing. Bruce Dickinson also was credited to do writing. However, he was in a fight with his former record label and was unable to add his name to any of the songwriting credits for the album due to that dispute. He then later, though, claimed a moral contribution to several songs on the album, which I found hilarious. I won't get too much into the postscript because we're going to cover Power Slave down the road, so I'll cover that. That's what comes the next year. They basically release an album every year in the 80s, but the band tours exclusively. Shortly after this album, Burr, the drummer, leaves, and he's replaced by Nico McBrain is the name of the drummer who replaces him for that album. So there you go. That's a little bit of a bio on Number of the Beast by Iron Maiden. I believe that Josh is our first take on this one. Thoughts on our first Maiden album?
Well, I think you were the person that introduced me to Iron Maiden in grad school. So, I mean, it's gonna be hard for me to be objective with this album because it's fucking awesome and I love it. And it's probably like one of the best albums of the 80s. There is no bad tracks on this album. I love it because it's so concise and every song is awesome. The thing I love, Bruce Dickinson is a defining quality of this band for me. His voice is so great and singular and complements the guitars on this album so well. And no one has guitar breakdowns / instrumentals like this band does. And I really love them throughout the opening songs. It's hard to describe the actual instrumental parts, but it's such a kind of singular 80s quality of guitar instrumental for me, and I also associate it heavily with 80s video games for whatever reason. I have a lot of songs, the sound kind of recalls certain games from Nintendo and tracks that have stuck with me through the years, and I think that might be unique to me, but that's another reason I like this album so much. The Prisoner is one of my favorite songs of all time. The opening is the intro to the British TV show The Prisoner, which was a formative show for me, which I discovered in college, and in terms of seeing kind of more esoteric, avant-garde in a way, just kind of out there weird TV. It's just kind of a great show that doesn't always make sense, I guess. So having that as the opening to the song coupled with everything else about it, I really like. The other thing, I paid attention to the lyrics this time, which I've always kind of known, but they do a good job at kind of telling stories and evoking imagery, especially in things like Invaders. The opening track is about Vikings, and 22 Acacia Avenue about prostitution in the red light district, and Run to the Hills, which is a classic tale of Native Americans versus white people. And
genocide, I believe, would be
yes.
the correct term for that. Yes.
Yes. And I think Hallowed Be Thy Name, which is kind of their most complex song, I would say, and interesting in terms of a guy on death row and then living on through that after being executed, and talking about how life goes on, and it has an epic quality to it, and it's the longest song on the album, and I think it like kind of is perfect ending to the whole album as a whole as well. I don't really have anything bad to say about this album. The Number of the Beast, there's the awesome yell that sounds like Roger Daltrey on The Who. That's always great to hear. And it's an album that I come to again and again, in the same way that I feel about like Van Halen and later Guns N' Roses and the White Stripes and many other bands, but and Led Zeppelin even. And it's just it's kind of a defining metal album. I'm glad it's at 35. It's probably appropriately paced. I'm surprised it's not in the Rolling Stone 500 list. It seems like along the way of what we talked about with Black Sabbath and Judas Priest and some other bands, this is like kind of on the history of metal, a really important album.
John Wenner runs Rolling Stone, and his take on like metal, right?
Well, he hates it, right?
Metallica existed, and then everybody else is like a contributor, right? And that's what metal is for him. So yeah, it tracks.
But it's I welcome more nuanced takes on this album from you guys. So.
Matt, how about that nuanced take?
Oh, I've got one, I think, maybe. So, yeah, I like Josh. I've always known of Iron Maiden. I remember seeing the album covers, or like I think probably a couple of kids I went to school with had the shirts. Never really knew any Iron Maiden songs. They weren't really on. I didn't see them on MTV. You know what I mean? They were just like, what is this metal band? Whatever. And I should have liked them because I did like. Well, I liked hair metal. I guess so. I like big guitars. I like that type of sound. So I'm surprised I just never really was curious enough to get into it. But John, same thing with Josh when we were in Florida. John was introduced us to it, and if I'm not mistaken, we saw fake Iron Maiden twice. We saw them on Halloween, and we saw them on 666.
666, yep.
So, 666, and they were great. How are you doing, Gainesville?
I don't think I saw them the second time.
You didn't?
I think.
Well, I saw them twice, Halloween and 666. And I love it. I love this. This is the best metal album that we have covered. I think this is stronger than British Steel. I think it's different metal than Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath still has kind of the there's like a blues rock element to Black Sabbath in certain songs, and there's none of that here. This is a straight up metal album, along the lines of the new wave of British heavy metal. I believe that this is what's considered in that realm.
They and Priest and Venom and bands like that. Yeah.
So to me, this is just it's very melodic. First and foremost, which is one of the things that brings it back, to me. It's fast, right? There's a lot of galloping. Like Steve Harris playing the bass, the way that he played, or just all of these guys, like how fast they're playing song after song after song. They don't really bring it down a whole lot. Yeah. It's got to be exhausting to do that, But there's a very kind of an urgent kind of galloping feeling that's rallying the troops kind of a deal.
Right from the beginning too. Invaders is like that.
Yeah,
breakneck.
And they have great guitar solos. I love the double, the two guitars layered on top of them. I think I talked about this a little bit with British Steel, how you kind of have the guitars playing the same notes, and sometimes there might be a little bit of a harmony, but the double guitar playing, not when they're really doing soloing, but when they're playing like just the melody parts of I always like that. It's a really full sound that you're getting here. And there's classic songs on here like Number of the Beast and Run to the Hills that are just really anthemic. I really liked Hallowed Be Thy Name. That guitar, I agree with Josh. It's probably the more complex part. It's more of a prog song because they're kind of weaving in and out different parts that are kind of coming together. But the main guitar part there is just awesome, and Dickinson's voice is fantastic. It's like holy crap, and he still sounds like that. If you guys hear any of the Maiden albums that have come out in the last 5 years or whatever, he's still hitting these notes. I saw them live like a couple years ago, pre-COVID. Awesome performance. Like they're just nice. It's crazy how good these guys are. Songs I wasn't that familiar with that I really liked. 22 Acacia Avenue. was a really cool song. I really like that. The Prisoner was great too. Didn't know that much. I love Children of the Damned. Just with music like this that sounds like this, and then to hear him go Children of the Damned, it's
got that Randy Rhoads guitar and that sound at the end too, where they shred, like easy guitars. Yeah,
it's just so funny, and it makes sense that of course the PMRC and the Christian right and would be terrified of this music. It's right in line. And I don't. Was this part of the? I don't know if this was part of the Filthy 15 or whatever
No.
Yeah,
it wasn't filthy. It was more the Filthy 15 was more pornographic.
Okay,
right? Whereas this is more
I'm sure they were probably
right?
or they were accused of encouraging teen suicide or something stupid
Ozzy,
like that.
Well, basically metal during this period in time was always at risk for that.
Yeah, but I'm with Josh. There's not a bad song on here. I don't know a lot of their albums. I will say the last 2 albums that they did come out with, in the most recent one, the Samurai Eddie that they did, if you guys heard that album's awesome. So I'm excited. I should listen to more Maiden, because it's also one of those things too where they don't vary what they do a whole lot. You know what I mean? I'm not expecting much difference from when we listen to Power Slave or if we were covering other albums. You're gonna get, it's very formulaic for them. But they do it so well. They own it, and it all sounds great. At the heart, there is the melody. It's if you got the metal, the edge of that, the great vocals, the cool, it's virtuoso in places, musicianship, and then you put a great melody behind it that just is really easy to gravitate towards. This is an easy recommend, and a great album. I'm thumbs up on Maiden.
Yeah, could you guys, before I go into mine, did you figure out the 2 songs that were sort of written more with the Paul Di'Ammo register in mind?
Children of the Damned?
Nope.
I was thinking Gangland.
Correct. That's one of them.
And if I had
22 Acacia Avenue, then
you got it. That's
yeah.
the 2. They sound a little bit more punk rocky, and that's what Iron Maiden sounds like their first 2 albums. It's like metal meets punk a little bit. I will go out on a limb, and you'll listen to it, and it is not the formula that you're attributing to it as much. But there's some really good songs on those albums. So if you ever want an interesting twist on the Iron Maiden sound, I love the song "Wrathchild" is a fantastic song on the first album, and "Killers" the track title. Anyway, those are some great songs. But this is where Iron Maiden becomes the Iron Maiden that you think. The triple guitar, the galloping sound, every album ending with an epic ballad. Because after this one, Rhyme of the Ancient Mariners and Power Slave, and there's there's always one at the end of each song, each album, right, that are along the way. This is where that trademark sound of Maiden that they kind of polish. They're not as and I don't want to say this negatively, but they're not quite as formulaic as AC/DC, right? They always have variations on the theme, and their lyrics, as Josh mentioned, are basically very interesting stories. I always find what they write about to be interesting, and they can kind of go in the realm of fantasy and sci-fi, more like fantasy, I'd say, in a way that doesn't lose me, like some other folks do.
Yeah, it's like medieval. Yeah. It's like medieval, battles and stuff like that.
But it's not personal torment too is a common theme of theirs.
It's kind of like dark and bloody too, in a way. Some of these stories.
Human tendencies, worst tendencies, right? Is kind of a theme they go, and being enslaved. They kind of do some of the free will stuff that Rush covers. They've got a little bit of the medieval that Led Zeppelin does. The dark themes of Black Sabbath. They're kind of a greatest hits of their influences to some degree. I think what Matt was trying to get at with the sound of the metal here is, there's a lot of metal, the thrash that's coming out at this point, but also they're playing fast, but it's a grimier sound. Black Sabbath always has that sludgy sound. There's nothing sludgy about Iron Maiden's sound. Like you said, it's a little bit more divorced from blues rock. It's fast, even faster than Judas Priest was. So it kind of, a lot of the cliches of Iron Maiden, of metal, that people are Iron Maiden, to some degree when you think about it. I always say if Iron Maiden had a different name that didn't sound as ominous, like, I can't tell you how many people that I've had listen to Iron Maiden, and I don't think they listened to them because they heard Iron Maiden and assumed they would hate it, right? Because they heard the name and they're like, ugh, Iron Maiden, this is probably heavy, like stuff. It just, what is it, like death metal? And like, I can't tell you how many people have told me that, and then they listen to it and go, whoa, this is really catchy.
It's very accessible.
Yeah, I don't know if were either of you guys guilty of that before you listened to them or no.
I don't know if I had like an initial reaction to being like, oh, like this is going to be too much. It just never was really on my radar. And then when I heard it, I was just, wow, it was a similar kind of like, it's really melodic and it's much more accessible. I thought it was going to be harder to get into. So I guess in a way, yes, I guess that is kind of me. Yeah.
Yeah. I was the same way. I think they just weren't even on my radar, and I didn't know anything about metal, and probably like it started with Metallica for me, in terms of knowing what a metal band was, and then it's just kind of...
Well, I have mentioned many times that I had friends who had older brothers who had awesome music collections, and I attribute things like punk rock and metal and certain other types of music, like music I probably shouldn't have been listening to at 8 and 9, right? I would just be given these tapes by my older brother, like, listen to this, you need to hear this because it's good, basically. And so there was a whole realm of metal that was in there, so that's how I first came across like Metallica and Slayer so hearing what thrash metal was and different stuff. But I can vividly recall getting a handwritten cassette that had the words Power Slave on it and going to my room and putting Power Slave in my cassette deck and listening to Power Slave and going, 8-year-old me going, well, this kicks ass. What was this? And what else do you have? And it's like, well, if you like Power Slave, you're going to like Number of the Beast, John. So Number of the Beast came on, and I'm like, this is all. And then it's Seventh Son, and, it's like next thing you know, especially it kind of opened up doors. And so when I think of Maiden, I think of all throughout, those late single-digit ages, teenage years. Like, there was just, like, Maiden was always there for me. So if I needed to, and I'd check in on them in the 90s, right, see what they were doing, and it was always enjoyable, especially once the mid-90s and early 90s, basically the early 90s, then the mid-90s, I don't know if you know, Dickinson leaves for a while, and then he reunites with them in the early 2000s, so they kind of had a little bit of a slump, but they were always touring, right? And so Maiden was something when I was in a certain place, right, like I wanted to get pumped up or listen, like I just put Maiden on, right, and in my room, and it was just a staple from age 8 to like now, to this day I can still put it on. And so kind of like with you talking about Duran Duran, Matt, like it's hard for me to divorce from Iron Maiden because it feels like they've been around. It's very different than your thing, right? They never were outside of my framework. They were one of the first like bands that like I was turned on to that wasn't from the radio or what I could glean from my own sort of small world, and there will be in the 80s and 90s here as we go through, there will be other bands that will get that, like I was turned on to them by the older brother of some of my friends,
right.
In this case. So credit to Mike Waller, who's I'm sure not listening, but if he's there, Mike Waller was the one who gave me that CD. He was my Sherpa into the world of metal. So I'm a lot of credit, but yeah, I mean, this album's freaking fantastic. It's great, and I don't need to be like biased because even if I hadn't had that experience, like I can see no scenario where I would not have thought this album kicked ass. It's got everything I want. It's got big guitars, full guitars. It's produced well, but not overproduced. The soaring vocals. It's designed to be played loud. It evokes feeling in me. It evokes like a combination of energy mixed with like the ominous themes, right? Like keep you kind of on your toes a little bit. Hallowed Be Thy Name is one of the best. I mean, all of these songs are played, like almost every one of these songs is played on like live concerts, which another formative thing about Iron Maiden, you talked about in the earlier segment with Duran Duran, Matt, like these videos. Iron Maiden sold, I don't know how many copies of their like most of how I processed Iron Maiden wasn't even their albums. It was watching these like concert films of them from all like the Far East or like, that they still put to this day, right? Like where if you Google like Iron Maiden in like Brazil, you'll see them playing in front of like 500,000 people
Right,
in a
it's
place
insane.
where you're like, this doesn't even look like it's like you could fit this many, or Mexico City, like, and
Well, and then they
you
show
just
the-
look at this thing, you're like, how many fucking people are in this thing?
Well,
And
but
it's like
it's
played
not
in front
even-
of 210,000 people. It's like,
It's not even
Jesus.
just the amount of people, but it's like the reactions. They did that documentary on them, and it's like people
Just crying,
crying,
singing every word in
yeah,
English, just
like passing out, not just from like alcoholism or just like emotional toll that it takes because they are so into this band. It's they're powerful, man.
But I can remember watching with friends just these concert videos of
Yeah.
them going back to like the Power Slave or Number of the Beast or Seventh Son, all the different Peace of Mind, right? They'd release these concert like clips of they basically go different shows right during the tour, and you'd see them play different staples. So I've probably seen like Hallowed Be Thy Name played like 50 different times at different tours, right? And it's always Bruce Dickinson like up on like a ledge somewhere,
Yeah.
like I am the like that, or Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner is. You said how do they rest like playing so fast? It's during that stuff, right?
Right.
When, like Bruce Dickinson's like bending the audience's ear with these tales. So yeah. But
Yeah,
go ahead, Josh, I
the
didn't
energy
catch
is a big draw for me on this album. I really like the energy that they put out, and all of their 80s albums are good. So Matt, I would just listen to everything else.
Just go in
the
order.
80s at least.
Yeah.
'Cause
Yeah,
there's
this
so
is-
If you
good
haven't listened
songs
to the
on them.
earlier ones, listen to them for context, because I'll
Yeah.
go out. I think they're underappreciated, their early albums. They're definitely not like duds, and it's like, oh, Bruce Dickinson comes and they get like they get better. Don't get me wrong, but like it's not like, oh, they had nothing there. There was plenty there.
Right. No, it's and earlier this week before we decided to cancel our running event when I was training, it's great to run to and to work out to. Like I was listening to this, I was like getting amped. I was like, oh, I was running pretty fast here, because of the the energy behind it. So it's great.
And this year they did do Senjutsu, which is the album with Samurai Eddie.
Yeah, Samurai Eddie.
2021. So there's still
That has a song at the end. It's freaking awesome. Like it's just, and I think that's one of the ones. There's like 11
double
songs
album.
on it, and they're all like 12 minutes long.
Hell on Earth
Like,
is the last song on the last one.
yeah, that's a great song. I will vouch for that. Yeah, it's that's a long freaking album.
And I'll end with one thing. I work in a high school, and one of the saddest things for me is that the collection of kids that are recognizably metalheads has gone down. However, and also what's happened is some of like the Iron Maiden or Metallica t-shirts have become mainstream enough that if it used to be you couldn't put on an Iron Maiden t-shirt unless
Right.
you'd listen to like everything. Right now you can put on an Iron Maiden t-shirt and go, I don't even know who they are, which is fine. I don't begrudge anybody for that, but there's a sadness because for years a patented thing I could do to any kid that I wanted to talk to was go up to them and go, what's your favorite Maiden album? And you'd know they'd immediately, Peace of Mind, Number of the Beast, like Seventh Son, like they could do it, and like there was no one who could wear it. And unfortunately, the amount of kids that are metalheads definitively has gone down a little bit. They still exist though, and so I long live the metalhead.
Yeah.
There should be in every high school a group of kids that are definitively metalheads that will only wear black concert t-shirts, and have listened to every album. And I just will never forget, there was one kid I took a chance because he looked the part, right? And I said to him, favorite Maiden album? And he said Power Slave without doing it. And he goes, I'm going to see them with my grandfather and my father, and I don't know who's most pumped up for so like Iron Maiden is now officially one that can travel through, which is awesome because I'm sure those people listened to them when they were teenagers or early 20s in the same way that I got to them 10 years after this, 8-10 years. And so
Yeah, they're touring right now, I believe.
go see them before